So today's workshop is on MLA formatting. MLA, what is MLA? MLA, or the Modern Language Association, is a group of writers who came together to determine a writing style that is good for more official types of writing for publication and for essay writing. So before we go too deep into how to format your essays or your writing for MLA format, let's go into a little bit more detail on the background. So MLA, as I mentioned before, it's simply just a formatting style for your writing. It's the style behind how you, when you underline things, what font sizes to use, how much space to have on your paper, things like that. So that's basic stuff like your page layout. It also gives you specific rules for punctuation. And very important as well, and this is maybe the most important thing for MLA, is the citation method. And citation, we'll go into a little more detail about what that is in a little while. And finally, it also goes over guidelines for publication. Now, we're not really going to be talking about those today, but it's important that you understand that MLA has a certain standard of rigor to it. Another question you might have is, who uses MLA? Why do I need MLA? Maybe I need to use a different type of citation method or a different writing style. And that could be true. MLA is primarily used in the humanities. So this is used primarily, again, by students, though it's also used by researchers and people of that nature. But it's primarily used in the English language and literature sections of academia. It's also used in foreign language, and it's also used in cultural studies. But for the most part, when you see MLA, you can associate that with student writing. So now we want to go ahead and look into the meat of the topic, the formatting guidelines for MLA when you're writing an essay. So the first major thing that you need to know about MLA formatting is that you have to have a 1-inch margin around your page. That simply means that from the edge of your text, there is a 1-inch boundary around each corner of the page. So sometimes you see ½ inch, you don't want a ½ inch, you want to make sure you have a 1-inch margin. This is really easy in Microsoft Word for you to go ahead and change. So at the top of the screen, you want to go to the 5th tab, which is the Layout tab, and you go to Margins option, and you want to choose Normal Margins, which will give you 1-inch margins all the way around. The next thing is that you have to have a legible font. Now, it's often said that you want to use Times New Roman, but that's not necessarily a requirement. The only requirement for MLA font is that you use a legible font. There's a couple of other examples of other fonts you can use. Times New Roman is the most common, but you can also use Garamond. However, if your professor says Times New Roman, use Times New Roman. However, one thing that is a requirement is font size 12. Both of these things are pretty easy to change, again, in Microsoft Word. From the Home tab, which is the default tab when you've opened a Word document, it's going to be one of the first options. You'll just go into the drop-down and choose a different font style. So you would choose Times New Roman, and then in the drop-down next to that, you would choose the font size 12. The important thing about having a legible font, whether it's Times New Roman or another one like Garamond, is that it needs to have unique regular fonts, italic fonts, and bold fonts. Now here you can kind of tell if you're watching the screen, maybe if you're watching on a phone it might be hard to tell, that there's a clear difference between regular and italic, but the bold doesn't really stand out that well. And so this font that I'm using here would maybe not be a great font for an essay. And this font, for reference, I believe is Calibri, which is the default font. So you definitely need to change. Anytime you open a Word document, Calibri is the default. So you need to change it to something that stands out a little more. The next one is double-spaced. So when we talk about double spacing, we're talking about the space between lines. And when it says double-spaced, that means there is a space between each line that is the same height as the lines themselves. So here we can see on the top we have a double-spaced set of text, and below that we have a single set of text. Now don't worry about the text here. This is lorem ipsum, which is Latin gibberish, just to fill out the page. But the important thing here is you want to have a double-spaced content. And this again is relatively easy to change. Under the Home tab, you want to go to the right and you want to look under the paragraph setting. And in the middle, you'll see the little arrows icon. Click on that, the drop down, and then select 2.0, and that gives you double spaced. Another important thing is that you need to have only one space after a period. Now this might seem obvious to you, but in certain writing styles, it's required that you have 2 or even 3 spaces after a period. This is so that your sentences kind of stand out a little bit more. You'll see this oftentimes when you're reading a book. Sometimes they use a double space after a period. But here you can kind of see it, and in practice you can see there's a small difference when you use 2 spaces. Make sure you only use 1 space. Minor thing, but it could cost you. Next thing, we want to have half-inch indents. So when I talk about an indent, I'm talking about whenever you're at the beginning of your paragraph, when you indent in, you want to use the tab key. You can also use spaces, but it's not recommended because different spaces are different sizes for different fonts. A tab is always the same size, it's always a half-inch, no matter what font and what font size you use. Next thing is that you want to have a page number in the top right corner. And this is, again, relatively easy. So here we can see we want it top right corner like this. And in order to do this in Microsoft Word, you want to go to the Insert tab, which is the third one on the top. And then inside the Insert tab, you want to come over almost all the way, maybe 2/3 over to the right side, and you'll see the header and footer section. You want to then use the page number drop-down arrow. You want to choose top of page, and you want to choose page number 3. And the reason you choose page number 3 is because that is the right aligned. Now that we've done that, your professors might sometimes ask you to include your last name as well. So they might, for my example, they might ask you to say Horton 1. So in order to do that, that is also relatively easy. Once you've created your page number or your header, all you have to do is you double click on that header. And when you double click on that header, you'll get this header editing mode. You can see the text for the actual essay has been grayed out, and you can see the little font for header has popped up here. So what I want to do now is I just want to click before the 1, use my arrow key to move over, and then type out my last name. If you have any other questions about this, or if you need to review exactly how this is done, I've done a live demonstration in our previous workshop on Microsoft Word that goes into a little more detail and kind of walks you through this in live. Another important thing with MLA formatting is you do not want to use italics for emphasis. So here is a bad example. I really like the allusions Hemingway makes in The Old Man and the Sea. Okay, so really here you don't want to italicize it, you don't want to make emphasis with italicis. What you can do, however, is you can use italics for the titles of long works. So this would be something like a book, or a play, or a film. You would use italics. So here we can see I really like the same exact sentence, but here I've italicized The Old Man and the Sea. That is the name of a pretty famous book. So that makes it so that you can tell this is a book title. And then finally, if you have any kind of notes about your essay that you want to include, you need to include those at the end of the paper before your works cited page, which we'll get into the works cited page in just a minute. This is things like if you read a book before and you see like there's a footnote at the bottom of the page. We don't do that in MLA. All of those footnotes, they go at the end of the paper, or in the case of like a book, it would be the end of the chapter. Alright, so now that we have the basic idea of the general guidelines for MLA formatting, let's talk about the first page. In many cases, you would expect to have a title page, but in MLA, there is no such thing. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to list out the details for your class on the first page, and these will be aligned in the top left corner. So first you'll need your name, you'll need the instructor's name, you'll need your class, such as like English 101, and then you'd have your date, or the date that the essay was due on, not necessarily the date that you're writing it. And so here I have an example. I have my name, Professor John Doe, MLA 101, and today's date. The next thing we want to look at is we need to center the title. So the title of our essay here, let's see, we've got symbolism of the dust mold migrants. Here you can see I've centered it, nothing special to that, but you'll notice, and that's important, that there's nothing special to it. We do not want to underline our title, we don't want to bold our title, we don't want to italicize or use quotes around our title, we don't want to change the color of our title. We don't want to really do anything that's going to make it stand out. So these are all examples of things you don't want to do with your title. Also, with your title, you want to use standard case, so no caps lock. Standard case simply means that you capitalize each word of the title, excluding words like of and the that act in between to connect words together. Now, there is one case where you can quote or italicize, and that's whenever you're mentioning another work. As I mentioned before, if you're listing like a book title, you would italicize a book title. If you're listing something as smaller work, like a poem or a chapter from a collection of books, in that case you might use quotations instead of italicize around the title. And then finally, you need to make sure that you maintain double spacing. And this is true throughout. This is true for your first page, it's true for all of the body of your essay, and it's true for your works cited page, which we'll get into in a minute. So then we'll get an essay that looks something like this. Alright, the next thing we want to talk about is citations. So you might be asking, what is a citation? You might not have heard the term, maybe you have. You probably have, but another word you might know, very similar, is reference. And a citation is simply that. It is a short paragraph that details the source of outside information or references. And a citation should include the following information in MLA format. It should include the author's name or names, the title of the source, a version or a number related to maybe it's been released multiple times, and then the publisher, publication date, and location. Now there's additional things you might need in a citation sometimes, but that's going to depend on the type of citation, and that really gets into the weeds, and I'll give you a better way to make citations without having to worry about all those minor details. And then your citations are all placed at the end of your essay or your work in the works cited page. Alright, another question you might see is, what is an in-text citation? So an in-text citation is a short parenthetical, which simply means something surrounded by parentheses that is a note indicating a reference. So in your essay, when you quote somebody, you follow it up with an in-text citation saying, this is the source. And the in-text citation serves as a reference point for you to return to your works cited page and say, okay, that quote was referring to this more detailed citation at the end of my work. So that way I can look it up. You need to make in-text citations for direct quotations, but also things like paraphrasing and generalizations. So even if you don't have any quotation marks, you don't quote anything, you don't pick any exact words, if you paraphrase or generalize something that an author or some other source has said, you need to provide a citation. Alright, so now let's go into a little bit of detail about some of the different types of in-text citations, give you some examples, and how we can go about creating those. The most common way to create in-text citations in MLA format is the author page style. So here we have an example. Romantic poetry is characterized by the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Wordsworth 263. So this is an example sentence from an essay. And you can note here this is a direct quotation. And in the parenthesis, the parenthetical, that's our in-text citation. You can see it says Wordsworth 263. Wordsworth refers to the last name of the author. 263 refers to the page number. So that's the general format you want to use for in-text citations with MLA format. But there's a lot of variations, so let's get into some of them. Another variation of the same author page style is whenever we already have introduced the name of the author in our sentence, or maybe even in the same paragraph. So we say Wordsworth, and then it's the same quote, and then at the end, in our citation, we only have the page number. And the reason we only have the page number is we've already introduced the author's name. Another case might be when you have a corporate author. Maybe you have a quotation that you don't know who wrote it, and it's written by a corporation, so it could have been anyone at the corporation. In these cases, it's usually the case that you will use the name of the corporation. So here we have the mission statement. Our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So this is the mission statement from Google. Google is owned by Alphabet, so this is attributed to Alphabet Incorporated. You also have some times where an author is not known. Especially this is not really true in modern literature, but in older works, you sometimes lose the name of an author. And so in these cases, what you would do is, and we can ignore the quote here, just cut straight to the end, you can see in parentheses, impact of global warming. Now, I mentioned this before, you can have a title in quotations or italics. This time it's in quotations, and the reason it's in quotations is this is a shorter work. This is one example in that case as well. Another type of citation, or another kind of change on our general citation format, is when you have the same last name. So here we have, although some modern ethicists claim that cloning will lead to designer children, R. Miller, others note that the advantages of medical research outweigh this consideration, A. Miller. So you can see there are two different people, maybe Robert and Albert Miller. It doesn't really matter what their names are. But you can see that you differentiate between the two Millers by including their first initial. Now, in the case where you have they have the same name, or they have the same first letter in their name, and then you could, if they only have the same first letter, you would list their full name. If they have the same exact name, but they're two different people, then in that case you would include the title of the work. In the case where you have multiple authors, here I have an example where we have, just like before, at the end, the only difference is when we have our in-text citation, instead of the one author, we say the first author and the second author. And just like before as well, we can introduce both authors' names in the sentence, and then we only need to include the page number. I don't have an example here with me as well, but if you have more than two authors, so you have 3 or more authors, what you do is you list the first author's last name, and then you say et al., and that indicates that there are more than 2 authors, and you would then list all of the authors in your citation at the end of your essay. The next thing we want to look at is multiple works from the same author. So maybe you're doing a comparison essay between the different works of one author. So in this case, what you do is and you can notice here we've already introduced the author's name, so that's one thing to point out. So Murray is already introduced here, and we can see we have 2 different books from him, Write to Learn and A Writer Teaches Writing. So 2 different books from the same author, and you'll note that we've already included the author's name. That makes it a little easier and a little less messy in your citation. But if you didn't introduce the author's name here, you would still need to include the author's name in the in-text citation as well. But you would also need the author's name and the name of the work. All right. And finally, I want to talk about non-print sources. In general, it's best to avoid non-print sources. These are things like internet resources. Internet resources are generally not as accurate, or they're not usually fact-checked in the same way that books are. However, as times are changing, so too is the factual nature of online information. And as such, it becomes unavoidable to use non-print sources. So whenever you're using a non-print source, if you're using a website, you want to use a shortened website title when you can't find an author. So for an example, here we have, this is from an article I found earlier. It says, physicists say they found possible signs of a fifth fundamental force of nature. This is from the BBC. We have some examples here as well where we do know the author. So in this case, this is written by a person named Taylor, and it is a review of Fitzcarraldo. And so we just have the name of the author and then the name of the article. And then we'll go into more details on the actual citation, again in the Works Cited page. And here we have the Purdue OWL is accessed by millions of users every year. Its MLA Formatting and Style Guide is one of the most popular resources. Okay, so here, the Purdue OWL is the source. So that would be the author, would be the Purdue OWL. And the MLA Formatting and Style Guide would be the work. And since we've included the source and the work, and when we're doing non-print sources, there's not really pages to count by. There's no need for a parenthetical in-text citation. The inclusion of the name, the Purdue OWL, and the inclusion of the article, MLA Formatting and Style Guide, that is our citation. That's all there. All right, so now I've mentioned it a couple times. Let's talk about the Works Cited page. So first off, the Works Cited page needs to be on a new page. So here you can see I've got my essay that kind of cuts off, and there's a big chunk of paper at the end that I'm just kind of wasting. And that's important. You want to make sure your Works Cited is on a separate page, even if you've just started the previous page. Works Cited, new page. Okay. And now this is pretty easy to do again in Microsoft Word. You just go to the third tab over, the Insert tab, and then it's going to be on the very left side. You want to choose the page break option, and when you do that, it will create a new page. The next thing you want to notice here is that you need to center the Works Cited title. So here, just like we did with our title for our essay, you need Works Cited is going to be centered in the page. Now the next thing, and this is a little trickier for some people, is going to be to set up hanging indentations. So a hanging indent looks like this, and this is what our citations look like. You're going to have the first line is normal, and then the second line and every subsequent line, so second, third, and fourth, will be tabbed over a little bit. So in order to do that, there's a couple of ways we can do this. One way is to select our text, and then we want to right-click and choose the paragraphed option. You can also, there's a dedicated button for this, under the Home tab, you want to go over to the paragraph subsection, and then in the bottom right corner there's an arrow that points down to the bottom right. You want to click on that, and either one of those, if you right click and select paragraph, or if you click on this button, they both take you to the same place. And that gives you this little pop-up, the paragraph pop-up. So under this paragraph pop-up, there's a lot going on here, but really we only care about the indentation section. And within indentation, we want to select Special. We want to click on the drop-down, and we want to choose Hanging. And that will give us this style of paragraph. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and give you all a live demonstration of creating a citation for my Works Cited page. So let's go ahead and minimize that. And I thought I had it open. All right, so I am going to use a website called Citation Machine. Let me turn off my ad blocker. Okay, refresh. And I'm going to be creating a citation for the book Animal Farm by George Orwell that I have here. And let's go ahead and go into my example here. I've got my example essay, and I just want to go ahead and use what I used one from this morning session. We'll just jump in here somewhere randomly. And let's see. So on page 5, I want to say all the animals were now present except Moses. And then it doesn't really matter the context of the quote, just that we have the quote here. And this is another important thing when you're doing a citation. The citation goes inside your period. So your period goes after the parentheses. And so this would be from, this is from Orwell, is the last name of the author. And this is from page 5. Okay, so now I want to go over to the citation machine. I'm going to click on the button that says Create Citations. Now you'll have to forgive the ads because I don't have I'm not paying for a subscription to Citation Machine. But after I click on citation, I want to click on book because this is from a book, and then I want to look for Animal Farm. So I'm going to search for Animal Farm. We'll give it a minute, and it actually is going to give us a couple of suggestions. And I'm going to scroll down here for a while, and I want to find Animal Farm by George Orwell, and we want the Penguin Group one. So this is the one that I have. So I'm going to click on that, click on Cite, and then I'm just going to confirm here. It says here's what we found. It has the book title, a book publisher, and a publication year. Click on Continue. And it's going to give me some more information that I can fill in. So here we'll notice we're citing, it gives us the option for the whole book. We want just a chapter. Maybe I'm writing our book report on Animal Farm, so I want to leave it as just the whole book. And then we can see the name is spelled correctly. One thing I want to change though is the source title. It says Animal Farm. I want to make sure that is capitalized. This is the first edition, so we want to type in first edition here. And then you'll notice here under city it says Toronto, Ontario, but we want to have Toronto as a city and then Ontario as a state. Okay. And that looks good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and click on complete citation. Okay, well I've already done this today, so it's going to make me do a paid message. So I have an advertisement that I have to sit through. But once I've sat through that, I can then click on my citation, copy that, go back to my paper, and then I'll go down here to the end. You see I have one from this morning. Getting some weird glitches, so let's go ahead and make that full screen. I post in my citation, and you'll notice in the two citations here at the very end, I have here this one has PP, and this one has P. And so this indicates the pages that I'm citing. So in this case, I'm citing page 3, or not page 3, page 5. So I want to write P5 at the end. Here in this other example, I have PP 11 through 31. So that indicates that I'm quoting pages 11 through 31. So if you have multiple pages, you want PP. If you have just one page, just P. And again, in your in-text citation, you don't need the PP or the P. That is just for the citation at the end of your essay. All right, and that's all I had for you guys today. So I want to, actually I say that, but I've got one more thing for you. So this whole workshop was put together using online resources. And I want to go ahead and provide you guys with some of those online resources. So the first one here on the left side is the Purdue OWL. The Purdue University Online Writing Lab is a fantastic online resource for any type of writing. This here I've kind of taken a snippet of what they have for the MLA writing style. They've got a lot of different tutorials, they've got videos, all kinds of stuff on MLA writing style. They also have things for APA writing style, which we'll be going over next week, as well as general writing tips. So a really good resource, online resource for writing tutorials. Next to that, we have the citation machine. which is the website I just showed you all. It is a site that heavily relies on its ad revenue, and you can't use ad block to get rid of the ads. It won't work if you use ad block. That's a little annoying, but it saves you a ton of time when you're making your citations. Really good resource there as well. And if you have a Chegg account, then you'll also have a citation machine account because they're part of the same company. And then finally, I want to point out that we also at Del Mar, we have the Stone Writing Center. This is a 24/7 writing resource, so if you're having trouble with your essays, you can reach out to the Stone Writing Center and they can help you out with maybe fixing problems with your essays. If you've kind of hit a brick wall, you can reach out and they'll have someone there to help you. If you go to the website that I've given on the screen here, if you click on the online tutoring tab, that will take you to a Canvas page specifically for the online writing center, and you can submit your work online that way. All right. Now that is everything I had for today, so I want to go ahead and open it up for questions.